can we just back up for a second? Because when you said that people listening might not have been born for Y2K, I'm pretty sure I almost cried. Because in fairness, that was 10 years ago.
I had to look at the calendar, Mallory, to say, were they born? But yeah, exactly,
I remember my dad flipped the breaker. We were all sitting on the couch when the ball dropped, and he decided to flip the breaker and shut the power off for the house because he thought it would be really funny. But my mom had a literal panic attack.
It's happened. It was all true.
It's funny, as a kid, you didn't realize the gravity of it, but it's funny, looking back at why people were so freaked out about it.
Or they planned and it didn't come to realization and it was all good. So your father was probably the good planner there.
Yeah, maybe.
That's where you got him, Mallory, right there.
Yeah, there it is.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Inside the Process, where we sit down with some of the brightest minds in business to dig into all of their process secrets and best practices to help you continuously improve and level up the work that you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year system and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Shawn, the super awesome training and dev guy, better known around here as Mentor Shawn.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here with you. And today our guest is Bhushan Sethi, and I'm so excited that he's here. I've been digging into his work, and he's not your typical strategist. He is a partner at PwC in New York, where he is a curious explorer who is driven to solve complex problems at the intersection of global strategy, economics, and people. He collaborates with leaders to create sustainable business and workforce strategies with expertise ranging from operating model design to culture-led change. Bhushan is an adjunct professor at NYU Stern School of Business and is a recognized thought leader on the future of work, diversity, and inclusion. He's also actively engaged in global forums like T20 and G20 and World Economic Forum, and we get to chat with him right here on Inside the Process. So, Bhushan, welcome. We are so excited that you're here.
Delighted to be here. Great to see you, Mallory and Shawn. Looking forward to this.
That was a mouthful. You're pretty impressive.
Oh, please.
So when I was prepping for this interview, I thought about how much uncertainty we've faced since 2019 as businesses and just, I think, as people. And many of us went from in-office work for much of our careers to what was supposed to be this 2-week, see you later remote situation to permanently operating either remotely or some people are doing hybrid remote. And since then, many of our friends and customers have shared how companies like Trainual have saved them in what was coined the most unprecedented time in recent history. And I think, honestly, people got really tired of hearing that word, but it was the only way that people knew how to say, frankly, we just have no freaking clue what's next. And it was the most professional way, I think, that people knew how to say that. And I think many of us were prepared with our systems and processes more than others, and it showed in a big way. So I want to get real here and just jump right into it, because most businesses and humans in general are still drowning in uncertainty in this world right now. What's the one maybe non-negotiable move that leaders need to make today to help them really future-proof their companies so that when these unprecedented things continue to happen, we could say, we're ready for this, whatever comes our way?
Yeah, absolutely, Mallory. So, the first thing leaders can do when there's uncertainty, it's not sexy, but is get out there and plan. And I said plan. I didn't say get out there and engage and embrace your people and over-communicate and execute what you can control, because you should be doing that anyway. But the one thing the pandemic has kind of reinforced as a lesson is those companies that are thinking about different scenarios around their supply chains, different scenarios around the blessing, yet the risks of technology, whether it's a cyber outage, a power outage, a system implementation that's gone awry, whatever it is, whatever changes, you've got to plan for those. And there's going to be existential shocks that you can't control and things that you can't be prepared for. There's going to be things that you might know about to say, what if our new product launch doesn't drive the return on investment that we think about? What if this investment in technology, the price of the project actually doubles and it puts our return on investment at risk? Whatever those scenarios are, executives today across industries, across functions, are having to get much more discipline around this concept of planning. We could talk more about the difference between strategic plans and business plans and financial plans and people plans. But the thing that we've been talking about, what we've been seeing in our clients, is those that have invested in robust planning processes are much better prepared for whatever shocks are coming.
So I'm a big planner myself. I love processes. I love systems. I love tasks. I have my entire day kind of tasked out, so I know what I need to prioritize and how my day is going to flow. And I think it helps me to be somewhat of a quote unquote high performer. But I've also faced people who say, you don't realize how much that's affecting your productivity because you feel like you need to plan everything and everything has to be, organized and tasked, and like you need to be able to just run with things and go, go, go. And so there's these people that are like, I don't want to plan because I just want to be able to execute and move and drive. And, they think they're the best. And then there's people over here that think like planning is the best. And probably we're all somewhere in the middle, or we need to be somewhere in the middle. What would you say that sweet spot is?
I'd say what we're describing here is what you're describing is well-organized execution, which is really, really important. Once we're really clear on what our strategy is, what functional plan we're implementing, we've got to be really clear on, do we want sales, do we want marketing, do we want product? How do we want those teams to work? How do we kind of execute tasks? And we've got to have milestones, and we've got to have task lists, and we've got to have check-ins with our team. That is absolutely important, and being well-organized in execution. But the planning thing that I'm really describing is kind of the level above that. Before we've made that decision around the system investment, before we've done the thoughts around which company we're going to go acquire and do an acquisition and an integration of, that planning needs to be kind of longer term, and it needs to be often based on different scenarios to say, look at today's environment. If we reduce interest rates, what does that mean to the cost of financing for our companies that need credit if we're in financial services? That is an important scenario, a macro scenario. You can't control interest rates, but as interest rates change, if you're in the financial services industry, you better have a plan for how it's going to kind of impact your customers and their cost of financing. And again, that's just a simple example. So over-investing in the plan, it's not necessarily that all of those scenarios will become realized, but then you'll be really clear to say, are we actually moving on the right path? And again, whether we're a small business, whether we're a large business, where we're talking about kind of plans of things that you know about, and also plans around your products and your customers and your people and your investments that are to some degree in your control.
I've been part of a number of acquisitions in my career, and I feel like you're never ever going to be fully prepared for what happens during a business acquisition. Like there's just always going to be curveballs thrown at you. But there was definitely a good amount of planning and research and such that went into it beforehand. Maybe using that as an example, but really thinking about all of the other examples that it could encompass. Is there some sort of like moment or formula that people should have in their brains that they're thinking of when it's like, hey, we've planned enough, now we can move forward and we can start to execute?
Yeah, there's a couple of different signals, and it's going to be different for different companies. Some are, to what extent do you believe in consensus and alignment around the decision, whether it's an investment, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's a restructuring of a business, whether it's coming up with a new location strategy. Getting enough people aligned that are going to be instrumental to the success of that change could work for some organizations. And I've worked with institutions that have been very consensus driven, and that's been really important. In others, like I've worked with financial institutions in time of crisis, where it's literally all hands to the pump to say, we need to get this regulatory changes implemented, which means process and people and technology, and we need it done very quickly. And it's all hands to the pump, and it's less around alignment. It's around clarity of communications. and we need execution. I've also seen that when companies have had to take out a significant amount of costs in a short time frame so that they can make cash flow. So different situations are going to need different aspects of when do people kind of are aligned and when you can execute. The other thing, Mallory and Shawn, is a plan isn't just created in isolation and it's a one done. Just like your organization or your day, it needs to be adaptive because things will change. And again, macro environment things with your workforce, regulations, the success of a particular program. So having a plan is really important, but being able to adapt to say, what are the indicators of success, whether it's around customers and people and financials? If they are not going as we wish, how do we course correct? And again, that's an important decision where you've got to bring the right people back to the table based on the change you're making and execute it with, speed and clarity.
I love that. Planning around the indicators of success. And I feel like no matter what uncertainties might come your way, if you're always driving your decisions back to that communication that everyone has in terms of what success looks like, it's easier to move the needle and make decisions and move forward despite what's happening.
Yeah. I think we get to this point where with that planning in place and we get into the start of the execution phase of the plan. And so I work with a lot of small business leaders, and one of a phrase that you hear a lot of small businesses, you need to be working, on the business, not in the business. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people that are working in the business. And when that's your mode of operation, it's sometimes pretty easy to miss the important trends and strategies that would actually be helping you to improve. So, Bhushan, I'm curious here. You're at the forefront of predicting business trends. So, to these business leaders that I've just referred to, what is one future shift that for businesses that they're completely underestimating right now that they shouldn't be, and what should they do to be more ready for it?
Yeah. So, I'm not in the predictions business. I'm in the scenarios business, and what I mean by that, for effect, is who knows what the impact of demographic change and population shifts in, say, the developed world, including the US, is really going to do to the labor force. There's a lot of different speculation to say, given the fact that families are not forming in the way that they used to, we're going to have to either net import a huge amount of talent from places that have better demographics so that we can actually have an economy where people can be employed. There's another scenario that basically says we don't need as many workers because we're going to have technology, we're going to have cloud, we're going to have much better automation, we're going to have much better AI, and we're going to have probably much better robotics. I can't predict the two of those. What I do is help my clients be better prepared for either of those scenarios to say, to what extent is talent really important? And to what extent is talent augmented with technology important? And where you do need to completely automate jobs because of cost needs, because of technology advances, and because of changing demographics, how do you make those decisions? There's some no regrets decisions. There's some adaptations to that decision you can make. But to answer the question, I'm being a consultant and giving you two answers. I'd say demographics. I'd say that we're really underestimating the fact that we are not having children. We are going to be hugely dependent on the state. We're going to have a significant amount of people that are going to be working for a long period of time. The retirement at 60 is not going to happen for a lot of people out of necessity. It's going to be a very, very interesting phenomenon that companies are probably underestimating from what do my consumers want and how do we invest more in businesses that like healthcare, like entertainment, like well-being for a more tenured population. And where are we going to get our workers of the future? Or is it going to be more virtual work in different countries? Or are we going to lobby our politicians for more immigration? So I do think demographics, given the fact that where we are, family formation, is something that we all need to be considering a little bit more, both as business people and both as parents and community members.
Do you feel like there is something that businesses need to be doing more to support people having families or I guess like a social responsibility that businesses have in this regard?
My personal opinion, and this is where I'll get told to stay out of my lane of family planning, is organizations in the US need to be much more like Europe, where we actually encourage much more paid parental care. And for those people, and not everyone does, but for those people that want to have children, that we create as many opportunities for them to have children, adopt children, take maternity leave, take parental leave, because we just don't have it. And especially maternity leave in this country. When my sisters had children in the UK, they would take, the best part of a year off. And that's kind of pretty normal over there. And that's a personal opinion.
I love that. I think that it does something impressive even for the morale of the organization. I remember when we instituted paternity leave at Trainual, and that was something that was not, that hadn't been part of it initially. Maternity leave was there, but adding paternity leave and giving the father as much time as the mother to be with the family and to be part of that experience at home, that did some really important and powerful things for the morale of the company. Like, wow, the company really, really cares about all of us and as individuals, and that naturally leads to a stronger, more helpful, fruitful workforce as well.
Yep.
Something else I was thinking about as you were talking about demographics being the one trend. I look at that, and if I'm a business leader, and if demographics is the thing, what's the thing why am I being blinded, right? What is it causing me from not seeing the demographics? You mentioned a few things in terms of the future. I feel like oftentimes we get stuck in the rut of the past and what I've seen happen up to this point, and this is the life that I have led. This is what business has looked like up to this point. How do I really open my eyes to what the future looks like and realize it's going to be different than what the past was? And how can I be okay with that? Something that was kind of boiling in my mind right there.
Absolutely. We're all scarred by our past, whether it's our childhood, whether it's our business decisions. I mean, if you look at the past 25 years of investments in technology, starting with Y2K, which for those people who were not alive then, it was when we all thought the corporate world would end as the clock ticked over from 1999 to 2000, and we thought we wouldn't be able to get cash out of the ATM. We thought the computers wouldn't work. We thought the planes wouldn't fly. We were just fine. But if you think since then, we've had massive investments in technology with, the rise of the internet, the kind of business to consumer companies, the enterprise resource planning systems that bring together manufacturing and production and sales. And now, obviously, the investments in cloud, automation, and AI. None of those have realized the business cases and the productivity gains and the GDP rise that was first projected. And that's because we as technologists and strategists and consultants, we're obviously kind of love the shiny new pennies. We over-exaggerate around the benefits. We think there's going to be more adoption. We think there's going to be more redesign of work. But it's just one example of why people are sometimes resistant, because we promise them a lot. And technology, we promise a lot of productivity gains and better job enrichment. It hasn't always worked out that way in our own work lifetime. Forget about if you study like the Industrial Revolution and, how much kind of inequality that potentially drove and haves and have not. So I think it's very realistic that business people we've talked to are skeptical around kind of leaping forward. And that's why getting leaders aligned, getting out and telling stories, making this really human, where we started this conversation around execution and engagement is so critical right now. And especially, Mallory and Shawn, in this environment where, whether we like it or not, everyone's on two sides of an argument in terms of everyone's polarized, whether it's around our politics, our social decisions, our business decisions, whether we should be in office, out of office, whether we're making the right investments in future demographics or well-being. There's so much divisiveness right now in workplaces, which are a microcosm of kind of society. That's the reason why it's really important to get out there and engage and tell stories and kind of meet people where they are.
100%, yeah.
Okay, but can we just back up for a second? Because when you said that people listening might not have been born for Y2K. I'm pretty sure I almost cried because in fairness, that was like 10 years ago. So I just don't even get me started on that.
I know. And I had to look at the calendar, Mallory, to say, were they born? But yeah, exactly. Generation X and Generation Z, in the workplace, those people who are like, in their early 20s definitely wouldn't have been born. It's crazy as it is.
It's funny. I remember my dad flipped the breaker. Like we were all sitting on the couch when the ball dropped, and he like decided to flip the breaker and shut the power off for the house because he thought it would be really funny. But like my mom had like a literal panic attack.
Yeah, it's happened. It was all true.
Yeah, it's funny. Like as a kid, you didn't realize the gravity of it, but it's funny like looking back at like why people were so freaked out about it.
Yeah,
or they planned. And it didn't come to realization, and it was all good. So your father was probably the good planner there.
Yeah, maybe.
That's where you got him, Mallory, right there.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, so you guys bring up a really, I think, interesting topic. Speaking of the past and people kind of being set in their ways. And there's this phrase that I think plagues many people, and it's, well, that's the way we've always done it. And they find themselves perpetually stuck in the past and unable to take their businesses where they want to go or being able to really step into the future. So what's your advice for teams that know they need to change, but are just simply paralyzed by the fear and uncertainty of that change, and they want to cling to what they know?
That fear and anxiety is actually super important and protects us in our lives. I mean, we needed to be hunter-gatherers for a long time, not us, but, our forefathers, because it was the way that we survived and the way of life. Like, we don't, as humans, like massive change. We evolve, we adapt, we introduce new technology, we introduce new regulations, we introduce new ways of working, post-pandemic, hybrid work, etc., Zoom calls. Like it's gradual change. There's nothing wrong with. So for those people that are being fearful and are questioning this is always how we've done this, you need those professional cynics. I'm sometimes one of them. I think that we are making huge bets on AI, but when I look at kind of some of the multiples, some of the firms, and look at some of the GDP estimates, even from kind of my own firm, I'm like, okay, that's a bit of a stretch, and there's a lot that needs to be kind of put in place for that to be realized. So professional cynicism is really important. You need those people in the team. How you get over that, though, is you've got to do a couple of things that we've already mentioned. You've got to engage the right people. You've got to actually kind of give them really good guidance on what we're trying to achieve. What outcomes are we trying to kind of benefit? How will they be personally impacted? And what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients right now is this term called experimentation. So as we're deploying technology with a number of different companies, we're using agile technology techniques where we're basically saying, how do we build kind of certain features of a product as we're launching this to a certain number of customers if we're a bank? How do we experiment and put it out in the market and test and learn? And again, this is not a new concept. Firms have been doing this. Scientists have been doing this for years. But taking some of those topics and say, whether you call it an MVP, a POC, or just an experimentation, kind of putting out products and then getting kind of feedback from customers, users, etc. It's a great way to engage. It's less risk for organizations, and that's just one of many techniques that you can have. But with AI, we're seeing a lot of experimentation because AI relies on people to develop use cases and kind of put them out there in a tested sandbox environment, get some feedback before you kind of scale and deploy and deliver on the business outcomes and manage the risks.
I love that. We're really big on experimentation here. And I think if you are a high performer at Trainual, you've either run an experiment or you're running an experiment and it's part of your H1, H2 goals. So that might be at like a micro level for just regular individual contributors. Or if you're, a VP in the company, you may have like a big macro experiment that you're running, but everyone is doing some form of experimentation at Trainual. So I actually love that you're sharing that because I think it tells us that we're doing something really right. But I think it's still scary for people. And I talked about how change is essentially just taking a step into the future and how scary that can be. And so I'm curious, what's maybe the simplest, most somewhat maybe overlooked strategy that companies can use to really rally people around change and experimentation and maybe owning, fixing a process or implementing a technology or getting comfortable with AI, like whatever it may be. How do companies really get people excited to experiment either on that micro or macro level?
Make them part of the journey. Some great advice used to be given to me in my earlier years of my career is when you go into a room and you want to convince either your boss or your client of something, you make it part of their idea. You make them realize that the inefficiencies in their supply chain can be solved by, redesigning this process, thinking about pulling these departments together, thinking about investing in some technology, but sharing enough with them so they actually come and tell you what your idea is. And in the same way, if we could just engage with more people and make them part of the journey, whether they're consumers of a process, whether they're customers kind of consuming a product, whether they're tech developers in the back office kind of working on stuff, making them part of the journey to say, we're trying to solve X. I really want your institutional knowledge and your creative thinking, your unconstrained thinking if you're a new entrant to the workforce that doesn't have 20 years of kind of history to kind of give me your perspectives. And that has never gone out of fashion. And I'd say the one thing that we've forgot to do well after the pandemic is engage people one-on-one, preferably in person. Because the more you can have those conversations one-on-one with people to say, Mallory, what really concerns you as we deploy this process? Is it you're worried about we won't invest in your upskilling? Is it you're worried about kind of the outcomes for our customers? Are you worried about some kind of grapevine noise that you're hearing from our developers that I'm not privy to? But just engaging you one-on-one is a really important way to kind of get the feedback, build that trust. And if we could do that in person for those businesses that are hybrid or a couple of days in the office a week, I think that's a great use of kind of in-person time.
I want to call back to a few things you mentioned a few moments ago, and the fact that it's okay to feel that fear, and okay that you have that feeling of we've always done it this way. That's a survival technique that we have, and that's a very positive thing. I think that's important because I think sometimes we realize this about ourselves and we go, well, man, I'm just such a jerk that I feel this way, that I'm doing things this way. But I just love that you acknowledge that's something that is a real thing and a real fear, and it is a survival tactic. And then and you give us some great tools here that we can use to move forward. But I did just want to call that to anyone out there who's going, that's me, I feel that way, but that's okay. Move on for that with that, using that fear in the right way. Right.
I want to just shout out too that we've talked a lot about anxiety and fear and worry and what are you worried about and all of these things, which I think is so important because a lot of people won't say what they're worried about, or they'll keep it to themselves and they bottle it up, and it's bad for morale and it's bad for experimentation and moving forward. But I'm also really curious because I think on the other side of anxiety is excitement. And sometimes excitement is masked as anxiety, and we don't even realize that our anxiousness is because we're actually excited. There's a lot of really interesting science to that too. And so once we've kind of dispelled, the things that people are worried about and the fears, and we've addressed those, how do we move forward and really get people excited? How do we get them to fall in love with process and fall in love with change and just really be excited about the future moving forward?
I think the first thing is just be human. And back to the point around getting out there, talking to people, engaging people, understand what the concerns are and what the hopes are for people on a personal level is going to be so important. I teach a class at Stern to MBAs in their first year. There's a lot of kind of concern about, in this economy, what do we do kind of after graduation? And what if we can't get our preferred job? How do we enter the workforce? And so they're fearful as well. And so I think the more we can just get out and be human and kind of meet people where they are, there's also a downside of toxic positivity. You've probably heard of this topic, but we've all met people in business that are so happy about everything, yet their company's not able to make cash flow, yet their products are not innovative anymore. They were great a couple of years ago, yet their competitors have kind of caught up with them. And so a real flaw for an organization is when you have too many toxic, positive people in the marketplace saying great things to your people. And then a couple of years later, you're, an acquisition target, or you have to make significant restructuring in your business that impacts people's jobs. So there's a fine line even with being too positive. And again, I don't mean this to be a kind of a depressing part of the conversation. I think just like in our personal lives, and as we raise our families, talk to our children, work with our colleagues, work with our clients, we have to have balance about the realism of a goal, the change we're trying to make. There's hope and there's happiness associated with that, and positive kind of skills building and productivity. But there's also going to be some fear that's kind of self-protecting, and some fear that we need to kind of manage out in a better way. We all wake up every day in our professional lives wanting to solve important problems, and we want to be enriched in the jobs that we do. That's why we do what we do, whatever we do. And so I think we've got to kind of tap into kind of the human side of business a lot more than we're doing right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I hear you fully. And I love that you're standing in your convictions. And I will just say one thing, and I've said this before, so if you've listened to other episodes, I'm notorious for saying this, but it's that what we as leaders deem a benefit, or, the visionaries of the organization, the people really thinking about those big macro changes, what we deem a benefit, profitability, scalability, all these catchy words, is never going to be what your ICs deem a benefit. They care about more time with their families and friends, more PTO time. Is this, increased profitability going to end in a bonus for me? Like, what is the benefit of this change for me? And I think that's always been a disconnect in my time in continuous improvement, working with leaders who are thinking that macro and ICs that are thinking micro, and the miscommunication is like always there in terms of benefit. So I do think that that's something that's really important for people to keep in mind with these changes as well.
Absolutely. And taking on the Herculean task, Mallory, of linking the two of what you said. So if I'm a retail person on the shop floor, how does what I'm doing on a daily basis line up to profitability and shareholder returns that the muckety muck are worried about? There is a way, and we've worked with organizations where you can actually design incentives that kind of drive both of those things.
Yeah, so true. It's an art, for sure.
Indeed.
Okay, so same vein, I was reading an article the other day that said 70% of change initiatives fail. And I'm not totally sure where all of that data comes from. And I'm sure from company to company, it's going to be drastically different. So if you're thinking that can't be right, we knock everything out of the park and my company's so awesome. Think about, again, these small micro changes and these big macro changes. And the general consensus is that 70% of them will fail. So our question to you is, what's the number one reason that you think teams resist? And how do you finally get them to be bought in when it comes to change?
The stat is very famous in my business of transformation, but the interesting premise there is you went straight away to it being a people and an adoption issue and a resistance one. And if we back up there, and I'm saying this for effect, when I look at some of the business cases for the transformations that are in that 70%, some of the business cases were unrealistic. We bet on technology. We bet on a customer demographic kind of taking up a product. We bet on the ability to redesign end-to-end processes across geographic boundaries. We didn't think about regulation change. And so it does bring us back to, you're making this big investment in a system and a process or an acquisition change. In addition to all the human considerations, if you thought about the work considerations and the tech considerations and the regulatory considerations. So for me, it comes back to, when I look at a transformation business case, I really look at it and say, whether it's process, whether it's regulation, whether it's customer, whether it's people, can we kick the tires on this and use some just good what if scenarios to say, how might this change? How might this change if, as you said, a significant amount of your people resist and do not adopt the new ways of working? What happens if customer take up isn't where we want? And so for me, it just comes back to writing really good business cases, not just what the CFO wants because they want that return on investment, but what does the marketing officer want? What does your chief customer officer, if you have one, want? What does your head of AI want? What does your head of human resources want in terms of that as well?
Yeah. So I think about everything we've discussed so far here and getting the people bought in. I'm a trainer by nature, so I always think about the education, right? Like, how are we going to educate our employees? How are we going to help them to understand and incorporate and integrate these things we've just been talking about here today? So I would love to hear your perspective on the role of professional development and internal education on helping people to come into more acceptance of the changes and the things we talked about during the session here together.
Straight up teaching, education, developing people with formal training, absolutely important. If that can be done in person, it brings a different level of experiential that I think we've all lost during the pandemic. And again, I taught classes at Stern, in person with a mask on, with a mask off, etc. So big believer in that, and that's super important. I think what we get wrong around that, though, is we don't give people enough time to apply it. So it's important to take people through classes in AI and kind of send them to, your favorite college or your favorite online kind of courses. And I'm working with a financial institution on this right now. But if we don't get them enough time to experiment and work on teams that can dream up the right use cases to deliver improved outcomes and get them enough protected time to practice that in addition to their day job, then we're never going to get the application. There's a reason why we kind of, we kind of have teaching and then we have kind of applying it in practice. I learned so much on my job through informal learning, through making mistakes, by getting really good feedback. Some of it was with colorful language back in England in the earlier parts of this century in the US, which you couldn't do right now in kind of firms. But they're really important times. They're really important. Like, the best feedback you get is on the job. The best learning you get is when you make mistakes. We need to make sure that we continue that education journey, Shawn, through like having time there, and then measure the outcome across both of those, the formal and the informal and the on the job.
So I can't tell you how much I love the fact that you just said, make sure you give the time for the learning to be applied, because that is hands down the biggest issue that I've seen in working with businesses is, training and application needs to happen within an hour, on Thursday afternoon. That's the time that you have for training, when that's not how learning works. That's not how humans learn things. We learn things, like you said, through application, through trial, through error, through mistakes, through getting feedback and building on the feedback we received. And that takes a lot more time than just simply the hour that you had for the training session. So I love that you bring that up. I think it's something that as business leaders, we need to be continually mindful of, that continuing education is more than just the event. It is the opportunities that we are given, that we are intentionally giving our people to further their education through application activities, that there are frameworks built around allowing that to happen. So thank you so much for highlighting them. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to training and development is we need to have the time, and it's not always in a box.
And I think bringing us full circle too, like it just emphasizes the importance of training and preparing people for the future too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. For people to be less fearful, you got to take them on that journey to say, how's our business thinking about the future? How might AI impact our business model? How might it impact the kind of products that we serve up or the services we provide? And taking that as a learning experiment, a learning opportunity for people to say, let's invite you into our planning process. We want your input. And as part of that, we'll learn together. There's a lot of humility that needs to go around these topics of AI, because we don't know how it's going to impact our business. We don't know how it's going to impact regulation. We don't know really what kind of artificial kind of general intelligence is going to do. We don't really know the impact of all of this on compute power and the environment. And do we actually have enough energy across corporate America to run all these large language models? There's a lot we don't know. And I think kind of investing in that, in a learning journey around strategy development is probably what a no regrets move as well.
Yeah, 100%. I want to touch on one thing very, very quickly. I recently, I mentioned earlier, I dug into some of your recent posts. In fact, one on X that I was really, I loved, and that was the 3 must-win battles for today's business leaders. And you highlighted some very specific leadership gaps: us versus them mentality, creativity versus productivity, and low attrition versus low engagement. So, I'd love to hear if there's one of these that really stands out as the thing that a business leader should be working on first, and what they can specifically do to start doing better today.
Yeah. I think the first is the us versus them. For me, the reason why I kind of talk about it in that respect is there's trust gaps widening in business. In a survey we ran around trust, we saw there's an 18-point gap between what business leaders think and what their employees think about kind of trust in their organization. The gap's even bigger for consumers and business leaders. So whether it's around return to office, whether it's around how we're investing in AI, who gets the training, who's going to drive the benefits, whether it's can we talk about social issues in the workplace with the right guardrails and the right respect and tolerance and humility. I just see these polarizations, these divisions kind of getting bigger. And so I think there's a big role for leaders, for organizations, for managers, for employees to kind of dig in and say, let's take the temperature down. It's an election year, but let's reduce the friction. We're all here to do good work. Let's unite around a common cause of our customer, our business, our people, and whether it's creating safe spaces to have conversations about topics that are personal to you on a social or geopolitical lens, that can be done. I've seen that done really well in organizations. Some companies don't want to do that. Some managers aren't comfortable about their people talking about politics or social issues. But whether it's, again, return to office is this polarized topic that I've been speaking about with media for 5 years, it doesn't have to be that way. Where people want to work and have the dignity of their work, as long as their business model makes that work and they're productive, however their firm's defining productivity, they can work where they want. They can sometimes work whatever time they want if it's asynchronous work. So there's just a lot more that we need to kind of come in and say, how do we kind of find middle ground and kind of cut around of these? It's not in office or out of office. It's not, you're getting the benefits of AI and I'm being left behind. We need to kind of find ways for us to kind of converse and kind of provide opportunity for kind of everyone. And they're just a couple of examples.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're getting at creating a culture of trust and connection within the organization, especially in this world where, to your point, we feel as divided as ever. So, what are some specific things that we can do? What are some things we should identify and work on? Again, where's something I can look at my business today to work on here in this realm of building more trust and connection? What might that be?
Well, one of the things, Shawn, is just the very premise of this discussion. If I take the other side of this discussion, it's everything the three of you are talking about sounds really woke, and what liberals would think about, or people who grew up in Europe or whatever. And again, wrong discussion, because it's not necessarily about we're just trying to say, how do we be human? We need to acknowledge that some people don't want to do any of what I described around connecting with people, understanding kind of people's concerns. They don't think it should impact their job. They think work is work. We come to work, we execute, we get a paycheck, and that's it. But the relationship has changed between employer and employee, and many employees, and not just young people, but definitely young people, expect a lot more of their employer. Whether they're a gig worker, whether they're a full-time equivalent, they expect a lot more in terms of what they stand for, the working conditions they provide, how they make decisions, etc. So I'd say, the very simple tactics are just be really clear to your people around what decisions you're making, whether they be social decisions, business decisions, workplace decisions, and drive clarity around that and consistency through how your managers manage people. And you can't really go far wrong. I'm not telling companies how they should kind of talk, have a stance or not have a stance on social issues. That's up to them and their shareholders. But the way they make people feel is a really important part of that. And there is ways that you can unite a workforce that has different views on social issues. Again, come together for the common good of what your business is trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think you brought us full circle back to those demographics, right? Like we started talking about demographics and we're kind of bringing it to a close talking about demographics. It's just really understanding that those are going to constantly be changing, and just being able to communicate and speak to those different demographics of people is super important.
We're betting on our young people.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Precisely. Look out though, because if my 9-year-old is next president, we're all done for. Just call it today. We're done.
You never know.
That's true. All right. Well, I want to close this out here. So you've spent years, dedicated your life and your work to helping organizations transform and really planning for the future. But personally, when you look into your own future and that of your own children, hopefully you have higher expectations for them than I do of my own. What's the legacy that you hope to leave in the world?
With my children and kind of business and whatever I do in retirement, I just want to be helpful around topics that I have some domain expertise in. So whether that's around, how businesses grow, how they transform using technology, how you bring people along as part of that transformation in a humane way, whether it's, governments needing to do that for different parts of their electorate, whether it's community leaders needing to do that. I just think that there's so much misery that we're creating in society, sometimes within pockets of organizations that we don't need to. I'm a big optimist. I think there's going to be an abundance of jobs and opportunities for people. The real risk is that it becomes unequally available, that kind of, AI and these investments in technology will not necessarily level the playing field. It might just drive more economic outcomes to the haves as opposed to the have-nots. So the more that we can equally distribute the benefits of technology and transformation, that's the thing that I want to work on. And whether that's with business people, whether it's with policymakers, whether it's with regulators, that's the change I want to see. And that's what, as my children, whatever they want to do, I want them to kind of bring that lens as well, to say, we can make progress, we can be capitalist, we can be good, which is good for society and business, but we need to do it in a sustainable way that does create equal opportunity for everyone to kind of share in those benefits.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love thinking about a world that is not just focused on equality, but also in equity. And I love that that's your vision for our children. And I hope they get to experience that. So thank you. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. Tell folks where they can follow you.
I'm on LinkedIn, where you'll get most of my professional content. If you want to hear about running and football and kind of any geopolitical chatter, you can follow me on X or Instagram if you really want to. But yeah, I'm a pretty open book. I think social media is a really important point for everyone at every level to go tell their story. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, you seem to be on the internet a lot, posting," but it's just, for me, it's like breathing. It's like I read a lot, I want to share a lot, I think I can contribute, I get really good feedback around it. I think it's important, it works for me, it doesn't take me a lot of time. I just think it's really important for people to establish their brands and tell their story, and it's the unique message you can control. So to all those people listening, whatever your social media guidelines are for your firm, you've got to comply with those, but get out there and don't be afraid to tell your story and share perspectives.
Well said.
Love that.
Be sure to click the link in our show notes for a made-for-you process template that highlights all the best practices that were highlighted today for planning for the uncertain future of work. As always, document your processes and please be a good human. We will catch you next time.